Good. Well, once again, a very, very warm welcome to the first of the New Year's Insiders Outsiders events. As many of you, I think, already know, the Insiders Outsiders project was originally, or took the form originally of a year-long nationwide festival several years ago now. I can't quite believe how long ago it is, but which essentially had the same remit as the ongoing program of online events still does today. And that is to look, to scrutinize, to analyze, to assess, to understand in a much more nuanced and sensitive sort of way the extraordinarily rich and pervasive contribution made in all realms of human creative endeavour, one might say, to made by the refugees from Nazi-dominated Europe to British culture. And as I say, this is the first of the year, and I'm very much looking forward to what lies ahead in the next few months. It's a rich mix, as ever, of different topics, although we do in fact have two on the world of publishing, which I'm very delighted about. We'll say more about the second one later on, but it's now my task to welcome our main speaker, in fact, our speaker for this evening, namely Marcus E. Lever, who will be talking to us about one of the big names in British publishing, who was indeed not born in Britain at all. He was born Paul Hamburger, but better known to the wider world as Paul Hamlyn. Let me start, though, by saying a little bit about Marcus, if I may. He's been a trade book publisher, running businesses on both sides of the Atlantic for many years, certainly since 2002, primarily in the field of illustrated non-fiction and children's publishing genres, namely in the form of Chrysalis Books, Barnes& Noble Publishing, the Quarto Books, and he's also the founder of the Welbeck Publishing Group. Since selling Welbeck in late 2022 to Hachette, he started a new business, which I believe keeps him occupied to this day, Gemini Books Group, but he's also completed a master's degree at the Institute of English Studies, which forms part of the School of Advanced Study at the University of London. You can probably guess what's coming. The dissertation he wrote as part of his master's degree was indeed on Paul Hamlyn. And I'm delighted to hear from the horse's mouth that he's just embarking on his MPhil research, as of this month, I think, Marcus. Yes, is that
Yeah,
right? And
indeed.
exactly what form it will take, whether it will be on just on Paul Hamlyn or on the wider, rich terrain of other émigré publishers who've contributed so much to the British cultural world, remains to be seen. Lovely. So thank you so much, Marcus, for joining us tonight. And over to you.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Good evening. And thank you for joining this Insiders Outsiders talk on Paul Hamlyn. I'm grateful to Monica for this speaking opportunity, as well as Anna Nyberg, who I shall mention later. Anna's work has been a source of inspiration to me, and her encouragement gratefully received over the last year or so. Um, Paul Hamlyn, the career of Paul Hamlyn, born Hamburger, as Monica said, and he lived from 1926 to 2001, is a story of personal ambition, publishing innovation, and industry change. Hamlyn was a visionary who made a lasting impact on 20th century publishing, but his story has received limited recognition in book history. An emigre who moved to the UK with his family at the age of 7 from Nazi Germany, Paul Hamlyn became a publisher who accumulated significant wealth during his lifetime, but is now mainly remembered for his philanthropy towards the arts. His career had three distinct phases. Initially, between 1949 and 1970, as an outsider, he started selling publishing remainders and overstocks, and then began publishing reprints from other publishers before creating his own titles. Subsequently, between 1971 and 1983 at Octopus, as an innovator, he developed an illustrated mass market publishing model that exploited technological advances, capitalized on the expanding middle classes in key markets, and embraced the opportunities presented by globalization. His final phase was as a dealmaker from 1983 to 1987, when in a dizzying 50-month period, he floated Octopus on the London Stock Exchange, merged the youthful Octopus with the venerable Heinemann, and sold the entire business to Reed International less than 2 years later. I'm really going to focus this evening primarily on the first two parts of his career, because I'm not sure a Monday evening in January is quite the time to delve into lots and lots of numbers, which the deal making aspect of his career justifies. But my view is that nearly 25 years after his death in September 2001, Paul Hamlyn's legacy remains complex. In the academic field of book history, he is limited to a small part that has acknowledged his commercial success, but neither has celebrated nor examined it. From a publisher's perspective, Hamlyn's legacy as an innovator in book publishing is underestimated. His career exemplifies innovation in the publishing industry. In the immediate post-war period, British publishing was rooted in tradition, still a book borrowing culture with high prices and limited access, restricting books to a narrow, predominantly affluent audience. Hamlyn challenged these norms, pioneering a new approach focused on quality at an affordable price and accessibility by selling books in venues that they had not traditionally been found. He democratized book ownership and consumption in Britain and beyond by leveraging economies of scale and utilizing global technological advances in efficient production methods to introduce vibrant content, which I will show you later. Hamlyn produced affordable illustrated books for the expanding middle class and helped foster a reading culture aligned with broader societal changes in literacy, education, and consumer habits. His international outlook also enhanced British publishing's reputation as a competitive force worldwide, extending beyond the colonial footprint and inspiring domestic publishers to adapt to a shifting global market. The critical aspect of Hamlyn's legacy stems mainly from his omission from book history. He is often compared to Alan Lane, the founder of Penguin, for his democratization of knowledge by marketing books to a broader market than had been done previously. I think this is too easy a comparison to draw. It tends to restrict Hamlyn to a commercial viewpoint alone and not enable him to receive the acclaim he deserves for his publishing innovation. Although many people recognize owning a Penguin, few would acknowledge owning a Hamlyn or Octopus book. However, they almost certainly own one or would recognize one from a publisher founded on Hamlyn's legacy. Neither is it beneficial to group Hamlyn entirely with the cohort of émigré publishers prevalent in post-World War II British publishing. The exiles that Hitler created when the Nazis came to power in 1933 were, to quote Peter Gay, in Weimar Culture, The Outsider is Insider, the greatest collection of transplanted intellect, talent, and scholarship the world has ever seen. These outsiders, predominantly Jewish, invigorated and transformed British publishing, post-war publishing, as they did in America. But to bracket all these émigré publishers all together, however, is overly simplistic. They all shared a heritage, yes. They came from different Central and Eastern European countries, indeed, at various ages and therefore differing generations, some with a publishing company already established, some with familial experience in publishing, and some discovering the publishing industry in the UK. Some were assimilated Jews, some practicing Jews, some Zionists, and some atheists. They were all, as Andre Deutsch's wonderful obituary in the Times suggested, entrepreneurs of the imagination, which is actually the potential title of my MPhil. And they were people such as Bela Horowitz, who founded Fiden Verlag in Vienna. In 1938, following the Anschluss, he escaped to Germany, and leading to the establishment of Fiden Press. Walter Neurath, and his later wife Eva from Vienna and Berlin respectively, who met at the refugee-owned Adprint, and Andre Deutsch, who was born in Budapest to a dentist father and moved to London in 1939. After the war, he founded his first company, Allen Wingate, before his eponymous publishing company began trading in 1952, and George Weidenfeld, who much has been written about. And obviously started Weidenfeld and Nicholson. But we could carry on. We could talk about Ernest Hecht. We could talk about Peter Owen. We could talk about many, many, many people. But what is fascinating about all of them is they were transnational thinkers. This was particularly true of Hamlyn. But again, a survey of the obituaries published at Hamlyn's death compared to those of the other émigrés is instructive. Hamlyn is the only publisher who does not have a book they published or an author they discovered mentioned in their testimonials. the progenitors of art book publishing, have an excellent study of their legacy written about them by Anna Nyberg, who you heard about on the call earlier, and who is, I believe, giving the next lecture in the Insiders Outsiders about the history of Thames and Hudson. Hamlyn is seen by these obituary writers to fit within this cohort, but the connotation does neither Hamlyn nor the writer of his obituary credit. It suggests that if Weidenfeld and Deutsch represented the Fortnum and Mason of the book trade, Hamlyn was more akin to Asda or Safeway, piling them high and selling them cheap. I think this is very unfair. We rely on Hamlyn's brother, the poet Michael Hamburger, who was 2 years older than him and lived from 1924 to 2007, to depict Hamlyn's early years. Sorry, there we are. Throughout his career, Hamlyn said little about his upbringing. During research, repeatedly, when talking about his background, I found that he cast himself as an optimist, the youngest member of a family of Middle European melancholics, he said. His public remarks are limited to radio interviews and press cuttings about his business ventures. There's a careful shaping of his image that continues after his death, with his daughter Jane saying this about him. Paul Hamlyn liked to take risks, to do the unexpected by backing a person or idea that no one else would support. He was always determined to look forward rather than back. Hamlyn and his brother were born in Berlin to Paul and Lily Hamburger, their father a professor of pediatrics at Charité Hospital, and their mother originally a nurse of Polish descent from a prominent banking family, both of Jewish heritage. Hamlyn was the youngest of their 4 children. His parents were typical of assimilated Jews in Berlin in the early 1930s. His father was an atheist, and his mother, after World War II, became a Quaker. His father, rather like his lifelong friend Klaus Moser's father, had fought in World War I as a medic, and he saw himself as German first before he saw himself as Jewish, his father winning the Iron Cross in World War I. And obviously the debate for Jews of assimilation versus Zionism was always to the fore in late 19th and early 20th centuries. What we do know of his upbringing, which for the rest of the family was a very bookish upbringing, was that high value was attached to the intellectual and physical disciplines of a traditionally German education and the absorption of German culture, of Bildung. This is talked about by Michael Hamburger in his Mug's Game Intermittent Memoirs, which is a very, very fascinating read, both about Paul Hamlyn and also Michael Hamburger's career. And we glean from Michael Hamburger how surprising the rise of the Nazis would have been to the whole family, given they had not been brought up as Jews. Hamburger describes how the games teacher at school, acting as referee, divided the boys into Aryan and Jewish teams, and how his best friends at that school happened to be non-Jewish. But after that indoctrination, when he was walking home with one of them after school, he was attacked with a piece of wire after his older brother forbade him to have anything more to do with Hamburger. With the Nazis coming to power in January 1933, considerably earlier than most German Jews, the Hamburger family left Berlin for the UK in November 1933. They followed Paul, the father, who judiciously left Berlin in April 1933 after Jewish doctors had been prohibited from practicing medicine. First, they went to Edinburgh, where Paul was retraining to enable him to practice in the UK, and then to St John's Wood, northwest London, where I too was brought up. And you can see on this slide, this is Paul Hamburger's pediatric surgery at 45 St John's Wood Park, which was designed, and he bought all of that furniture from Berlin. It was designed by Ernst Freud, the son of Sigmund Freud, who was a great family friend. Hamburger was 9 years old. Hamlyn was 7 years old when they moved, and they describe Hamburger describes an early encounter wandering through the corridors of his and Hamlyn's all-male Edinburgh school as a struggle for survival, and continues that it was like learning to swim by being thrown into deep water with a language difficulty that made us feel lost. The lack of language mobilized Hamburger's urgency to understand and later become a translator. His extensive writings allow us to reflect on what he left behind in Germany and what he brought as a migrant, but it's less discernible this for Hamlyn. As a young émigré, it would seem you have two choices: looking back to understand where you come from or being determined to look forward. And we know that Hamlyn changed his name shortly after his father died in 1940, choosing the surname Hamlyn from the telephone directory. His entrepreneurial skills and surname seem to have led to his nickname at school being Sausage, which hastened his name change. But his innate business sense could be seen from an early age. At his Quaker boarding school, known for pacifism and vegetarianism, he convinced the school to encourage his passion for photography by converting a store cupboard into a darkroom from which he sold sausage and bacon rolls to his fellow pupils who were not appreciative of a plant-based diet. By changing his name from Hamburger, Hamlyn took a different approach from the other emigre publishers mentioned previously, and from his brother, albeit the Neuraths, chose the evocative Thames and Hudson to adopt an Anglo-American profile. I'm sure, having read Daniel Snowman's introduction in Insiders Outsiders, all of you know about Isaac Deutscher, who coined the oxymoron, the non-Jewish Jew. And I think what's fascinating about Hamlyn, the true essence of Hamlyn as an outsider, was how he thought and behaved differently in his career. Rather than just being his Jewish heritage and emigre childhood alone, Hamlyn was in publishing, yet not of it, as alluded to earlier from his obituaries and those of his fellow emigre publishers. Coincidentally, George Weidenfeld described this mindset that he had, and I think we can ascribe to Paul Hamlyn most cogently when talking about his post-World War II ambitions. He said, and this can be found in Remembering My Good Friends, his autobiography, "I yearned to start something myself and turn my condition of being with the English, but not of the English, into an advantage." Hamlyn was not academic and left school at 15 in 1941, a year after his father had died. Given the family's reduced financial circumstances, he needed to work, and his formative employment is instructive as he started his career by product and market focused jobs, which he continued throughout his career. He obtained various roles at Country Life magazine, beginning as a messenger boy, but owing to staff shortages caused by the war, he eventually became the editor of the correspondence column, sometimes making up letters from the public for his entertainment. And then from 1944 to 1947, Hamlyn was conscripted and sent to South Wales to work in the coal mines as a Bevan boy, a part-time job being spent at weekends selling books of film scripts throughout the area. Upon returning to London, he spent a year working at Zwemmer's bookshop. This customer-facing orientation of Hamlyn's early career is critical to understanding his mindset, and the experience at Zwemmer's was influential, given it was, as Herbert Reed, the art critic, said, was always more than a bookshop. It was a challenge in the midst of our provincial ignorance and Philistinism, a beacon of enlightenment. In 1948, the 22-year-old Hamlyn realized he did not want to work for anyone else and decided to set up on his own using his grandfather's legacy of £350. Hamlyn notes in an interview that the money was accruing only minimal interest in a post office savings account, and he believed he could use the funds more effectively. After his experience at Zwemmer's, his idea was to create a different kind of bookshop. So he purchased the lease of a shop in Parkway, Camden, London, for £200. The shop was a dismal disaster until a polar bear cub, Brumas, was born in London Zoo. The shop lay on the route from Camden Tube Station to the zoo, and foot traffic is said to have increased dramatically. Interestingly, this is still referenced on the London Zoo website. Hamlyn seized the opportunity to publish a book about Brumas and sold thousands and thousands of copies of the book, keeping the shop solvent. This instinctive sense for what the public wanted underpinned Hamlyn's entire career and led to the creation of his first publishing company, Books for Pleasure Limited. The name resonated with Hamlyn's philosophy of book publishing. He wanted to create books that had sex appeal. He wanted buyers to open and touch the books and to give the reader pleasure and enjoyment for a tiny amount of money. We have to remember that this philosophy was honed against the backdrop of a Britain recovering from World War II. Hamlin talked of the dull and dusty bookshop in Rochdale with the snobbish assistant who scares off the buyer, a universe he believed was 10 times bigger than was understood by other publishers. Books at that time were relatively scarce, and the Ministry of Supply kept paper supplies to publishers and printers on a strict quota until 1953. The British book still appeared in ugly wartime regulation format and was drab. The industry at the time was hamstrung by convention, introspective and hidebound by rules from the net book agreement to union restrictive practices. Hamlin had recognized long before other publishers that the inhibiting effect of the net book agreement in post-war Britain. It had come into practice at the beginning of the 20th century as a stabilizing mechanism, effectively meaning no discounts and therefore a very low level of retail competition. But publishers in all manners needed to move on physically and spiritually from Paternoster Row, which had been blitzed so devastatingly at the end of 1940, and stop setting a high value on the dusty survivors. Their business models did not factor in remainders, but we know at the end of the book boom of the 1940s there were plenty of remainders. And this is where Hamlin started, buying up bulk stocks of books that had not sold as well as publishers wanted them to. At that time, a remainder dealer was considered akin to a market trader and not recognized as part of the publishing business. And I just love this photograph that can actually be found of Paul Hamlyn at Camden Market circa 1955, hand selling books to customers. Not only did he trade in the market, but he persuaded department stores across the UK to allow him to set up counters within the stores where he merchandised the product. As he himself said, the English are not book buyers and will not pay the price for books unless specially lured to do so. The answer is merchandising. This means lowering the price of a book by selling it in vast quantities. It also means going after the customer instead of waiting for him to drop in. I should just say at this time that it may not sound revolutionary now, but it was completely revolutionary at the time. And a lovely anecdote that I found, an indication of how Hamlin was perceived in publishing and bookselling at that time, can be gleaned from a story told about him by a man called Michael Gear, who's a publisher and trade commentator, who says, he went one summer's day to see the buyer at W.H. Smith, Mr. Fote. It was a blindingly hot day. Fote was wearing a dark suit with a waistcoat, and Paul came in wearing his beautiful silk shirt with a nice tie. Fote looked at him, then went and peered out of the window. Hamlin said, "Are you looking for something, Mr. Fote?" And Mr. Fote of Smith's, looking at Hamlin in his elegant shirt and no jacket, said, "I was wondering where you had left your barrow." If this story seems apocryphal, then no less a publisher than Harold Macmillan, Prime Minister of the UK from January 57 to October 1963, expostulated about the flashy outsider who focused on books as a product to sell, saying, "We cannot have the likes of Paul Hamlyn in British publishing." This uncharitable comment from a scion of one of the largest and oldest family publishers is unsurprising. At the beginning of Hamlin's career, publishing was the preserve of the eponymous or family-run publisher. A person or people could be identified with it. By the time Hamlin's career finished, the term publisher mainly related to the corporate body. Hamlin exploited publishers' mistakes and created business of remainders and reprints, as well as his own branded imprint, Paul Hamlyn Books, originally Books for Pleasure, where he originated titles that he could see the market wanted. Between its founding in 1949 and sale to IPC in 1964, Hamlin became a threat to publishers like Macmillan with the clarity of his focus on product, how to market it, and the dispassionate way decisions were made. He and his executives were entirely focused on the product they were selling, the price the consumer would pay, and how they would merchandise it. He viewed the role of publisher as a taste interpreter as well as a taste maker. I don't think he's been adequately understood within book book history as he might have been, because accounts of publishing by both practitioners and academics mainly focus on the publisher as solely a tastemaker, very rarely from the viewpoint of the end consumer, and usually from the literary end of the publishing spectrum. As a remainder trader, Hamlyn bought a remainder or reprint from a publisher, thereby studying the customer's buying patterns and interpreting their taste. The traditional way of publishing is for the publisher to dictate the market's taste. I'm going to show you now Hamlyn's relentless determination to think differently about books and an indication of how ingrained this new thinking became in his company and amongst his executives. For example, the use of the book cover as a visual merchandising tool, the affordability of the product for customers compared to other illustrated books in the market at the time, and the beginnings of an appreciation of the global market and supply chain. But above all, the need to sell a book, to put it in a customer's hands in a multitude of venues, was a distinctly different approach compared to that being taken by the rest of the publishing industry. So here we see the jacket of a book as a sales tool, and how it was a critical piece of merchandising. So this is a book, Herman Leich's History of the World, and it's instructive. This is the George Allen Unwin edition, published in 1952, and Hamlin believed, his philosophy was, we should show a profit, but I believe in also selling at the most economic price. So this is the Allen Unwin cover, and then the next slide is the Spring Books edition cover, and this was in 1963. So you've got two very different covers. I'll just go back to the previous cover if I can. Perfectly nice cover, but not terribly inviting to the customer, and then very inviting. The other thing that's interesting is the price here. So the Allen Unwin price was 35 shillings net. The Spring Books edition, 11 years later, was also 35 shillings. The price may look the same, but Spring's version is considerably better value, considering there'd been 37% inflation between the two editions of the book. We do know from the wonderful archive in Reading, the Allen Unwin archive, that the Allen Unwin version of the book absolutely bombed with the red cover, but the Spring Books edition with this cover sold more than 20,000 copies in its first printing. Once the jacket and the book price was set, knowing that the product was economically viable, it became important to sell the book in conjunction with the retailer. And this was a new way of selling books. There's some wonderful examples that I don't have time to share with you, but the point I'm trying to make here is that books were being merchandised for the first time. They were also merchandised themselves, created explicitly for a non-book buying public. There's one particular promotion he did with Fine Fair, which was owned by the Canadian Weston family, the people who now own Fortnum and Mason and Selfridges, I believe, and they had supermarkets where he did a fantastic cookery book, A to Z of cookery, and he did separate editions that he bound up at the end of the 2-month promotion and sold in the trade. But for the first 2 months, you could only get those books in Fine Fair. Hamlyn sold Paul Hamlyn Limited to IPC, a newspaper and magazine conglomerate, in 1964 for 2.275 million, about 38 million pounds today, 15 years after he founded it with his grandfather's bequest. One of the ironies of Hamlyn's career is that, as we shall see, Hamlyn was one of the least corporate individuals imaginable. His 6 years at IPC were unhappy, despite his commanding position in the publishing industry as chairman of their books division, as he had to encounter heavy unionization, centralizing conglomerate, tendencies and being based outside of London in Feltham in Middlesex. The experience informed his later founding of Octopus. People like Hamlyn may not have been welcome in publishing by Macmillan, but he was now about to transform their industry. In this next phase of his career as the innovator, Hamlyn defined his publishing company's identity in Octopus, developing illustrated mass market publishing by maximizing technological advances, globalisation trends, and the expanding middle classes in its main markets. At the beginning of his autobiography, the publisher, Frederick Warburg, tells of a conversation he had at the launch party for the new novel of a promising author. A middle-aged man of distinguished appearance asked him, "Is publishing an occupation for gentlemen, or is it a real business?" Israel Seif, who was chairman of Marks and Spencer from 1964 to 1967, a company that played an integral part in Hamlyn's career, posed that question. Hamlyn unequivocally answered that publishing was a real business in the period from the foundation of Octopus and the time Reed International acquired it in 1987, as well as the price it paid. My primary source revealing how Hamlyn created a real business was the offer for sale by tender document that Octopus prepared for the London Stock Exchange when listing its shares for public ownership in 1983. This flotation occurred 12 years after Hamlyn had founded Octopus. He described the document as horribly, horribly expensive to produce, my most expensive book ever. But its explanation of Hamlyn's publishing philosophy is very helpful. My analysis of the document shows that how Hamlyn had evolved his thinking around the cover and price of a book, understanding the customer in greater detail, and honing the economic viability of the product into a creative system. He underpinned Octopus with a discipline in innovation, with a focused adherence to the book commissioning model, a dynamic approach to printing the book, its format, and its location. Finally, the expansive manner in which books were distributed and marketed globally allowed a strictness in the financial performance of the company. He took the clear philosophy created in his early career and developed a significant business at Octopus. So what was the profile of Hamlyn's readers? They were the buyers scared off by the dull and dusty bookshop in Rochdale with the snobbish assistant. And Hamlyn recognised two aspects of post-World War II UK publishing. First, that class has never been far away from debates over books and culture in 20th century Britain. And with its increased purchasing power, the emergence of the middle class presented a market worth pursuing, a universe Hamlyn believed was bigger than was understood by other publishers. The post-war welfare state did not just drive this, it was also the advantages that the 1944 Education Act brought to bear on society. Alan Lane had recognised aspects of this too with Penguin in the mid-1930s. Still, while Penguin generated a new attitude to book buying, a new class of readers was not unlocked. Hamlyn's insight was to play into the conceptualization of leisure as a consumer category. In doing so, he unlocked a new category of book buyers and readers. I think this category breakdown that I've got on the page at the moment is instructive. You'll see at the top is cookery, 30%. That's a huge amount. And I will also talk about the pickles, which is a fiction bind-up series with Heinemann. This category breakdown really shows the clarity that Hamlyn and his colleagues had about what to publish post World War II. And in the 1970s and 1980s, he and his executives were now publishing and marketing books on an international scale, as ever focused on the product and market. A theme throughout the tender document is the publisher's promise to the end consumer, which I'm going to show you now, the purchaser and the reader, which is clear and concise. They know who that reader is and what the reader is looking for. That reader engagement begins with the cover design and then the layout and typesetting of the book's interiors. Understanding the end consumer makes it easier to structure the book inside and out. So here is the cover for Perfect Cooking by Marguerite Patton. If anyone wants a copy of this, I've got about six of them that I bought from Abe Books. Probably shouldn't admit to using an Amazon affiliate, but there we are. The cover for Perfect Cooking adheres to the sex appeal that Hamlyn applied to the Spring Books version of Life's A History of the World's Art compared to the Alan Unwin version. The jacket is a marketing tool. The photograph on the dust jacket promises delicious recipes in the book and highlights that there are over 450 colour illustrations and over 1,350 recipes, all priced at £2.95. We then go into the inside front cover, as can be seen, offers a double spread of cookery terms, and the inside back cover has tips called Put It Right for when disasters in the kitchen happen. Once the reader is enticed into the book, the introduction, as mentioned above, makes them feel comfortable. Then cleverly, section 1 is puddings and desserts, the most attractive and appetizing part of cooking for most people. Yes, the layout is crowded, but helpful with suggestions for special occasions, for family occasions, as well as the blueprint recipe. As Marguerite Patton says in her memoir, however elaborate a dish may seem, you can be absolutely certain it's based on something fairly simple, straightforward, and well known. I've taken these dishes as my blueprints. Even if you do not wish to make the blueprint recipe, read it because it contains the clue and advice for success with all dishes based upon it. Throughout the book, the reader is being guided and helped, never patronized or talked down to. The promise endures through the editorial copy and design of the book. But the book format specification is only one of the key differentiators of Hamlyn's thinking. It's key to the look and feel of the book as well as the pricing, and therefore the project's ability to hit commercial key performance indicators for the business as a whole and delivery dates for the customers. Octopus's production policy was to develop long-term relationships with suppliers in the Far East, the UK, Europe, and America, treating the printer as a significant partner and part of the process rather than an outsourced commodity. 2/3 of Octopus's turnover was printed in the Far East. And printing in the Far East for illustrated books still continues today. When I first went to the Far East 25 years ago, I spoke to people who said, who told me how incredibly important Paul Hamlyn what was to them. And Sue Thompson, who was his first managing director at Octopus, who sadly passed away in the middle of last year. The substantial majority of these Hong Kong printers, they negotiated annual arrangements with on volume and price. And these relationships became increasingly crucial given that Octopus books were generally produced in a range of standard formats, enabling economies to be achieved in production, including purchasing paper, which allowed more precise forecasts of costs. And again, I can't underestimate the consumer was at the forefront of this decision making, with the UK government having to declare 5 states of emergency within the first 4 years of the 1970s, with industrial disputes and power cuts taking place. The move from the UK to the Far East is a first-hand look at the surging tide of globalisation and of Britain's economic lead evaporating. In terms of Octopus's sales model, the main sales channels were to book trade distributors, including foreign publishers and book clubs, which represented 53% of Octopus's publishing revenues in 1982, and major retailing organizations, which represented the remaining 47%. These distributors worked with Octopus to plan and pre-sell books in advance of printing. The marketing team was tasked with working with distributors to ensure the successful promotion of books, which Octopus jointly funded with the distributors, advertising campaigns and merchandising units point of sale. Octopus had relationships with key retailers throughout the world with whom it had these exclusive publishing programs, major store chains like Marks and Spencer, which I mentioned before, Kmart in the US and Australia, supermarkets in the UK and Australia like J. Sainsbury and G.J. Coles, as well as the major book retailers in the US and Canada, B. Dalton Booksellers, Walden Books, and Coles and Classics. The programs were planned in consultation with customers in advance of book production. In 1982, sales to Marks and Spencer accounted for nearly 25% of Octopus's revenues. This is a remarkable figure. Um, so the chart on the screen here illustrates the international distribution of Octopus's sales. As striking as the 25% of sales to Marks and Spencer is, 40% of sales are derived from outside the UK. This underscores that Octopus was a global entity rather than merely a UK and Empire business, with the Australasian figure of 9% being somewhat lower than expected. We know, for example, that Penguin's Australian business at this time constituted 25% of their global total at a similar revenue level. Foreign language editions were handled mainly through overseas publishers who translated and published books supplied by Octopus, what's known as a co-edition. The global nature of the company is underlined by the fact that over 30% of the staff are overseas, although most of them are located in Hong Kong to focus on printing and production. Production and distribution combined with marketing constitute 40% of the employee base, double the number of publishing people. What's important about this? Octopus was clearly a format-driven, sales-led business. With 29% of the staff focused on finance and administration, we can further tell how important the business's supply chain and cash management were. And lastly, in an era of changing labour relations in the UK, it's interesting to note that salaries, working conditions, and benefits are said to be above the industry's average, with various incentive schemes in place to reward employees for delivery of profit improvements and return on capital employed. It was said that Hamlin's chauffeur made £200,000 from selling his shares on the flotation of Octopus. And I thought that was apocryphal, but actually Sue Thompson confirmed that to me when I asked her during my research. The numbers in terms of the stunning success of Octopus are here, and I'm sorry that they're so small, but let me just tell you, they started in 1974. 1972. In 1974, I went to Companies House and I found that their revenue was £4 million. By 1982, their revenue was £30.7 million. A really stunning achievement. And what's even more remarkable about these figures is that Hamlin had to contend, Octopus had to contend with the effects of the recession in the UK in 1979 and 1980, as well as the marked strength of sterling, which adversely affected margins in the group's principal export territories. Nevertheless, Octopus went public on 18th of April 1983, with 3.1 million shares being sold, 2.4 million of which were owned by Hamlin and his family, the balance by directors and other staff, such as his chauffeur. A conservative minimum price was put on the shares of 275p, but the issue generated considerable interest, and the actual strike price of the shares on flotation was 350p, or 27% above the minimum level, valuing the whole company at £55 million, or £237 million today. Hamlin still owns 67% of the business, a healthy return on the £10,000 he had invested when setting up the company in 1971. The company was valued at 1.8 times its 1982 turnover of £31 million and 11.5 times pre-tax profits of £4.8 million. Please try and remember those numbers, but I will come back to them, I promise. It's interesting to ponder why Hamlin wanted to float Octopus at this juncture. He had no financial need to, and the publishing industry in the UK might have looked very different had he not done so. I would like to posit, most likely the decision-making was driven by Hamlin's determination to always look forward. So, despite the fact he owned the majority of the shares and could have continued his familiar work of making and selling books, which he adored, I've spoken to so many people who've worked for him, and he loved the thrill of the chase. He loved the idea of coming up with an idea for a book with his team and selling it. The middle bit, not so much, and I have huge sympathy with that because that's kind of how I feel about book publishing as well. But the next phase of his career is fascinating. His focus after Octopus's flotation shifted from deal making from publishing. The rapid succession of deals that followed was driven by the financial community's need to keep progressing and expanding the company. I won't go into detail on the amount of deals, but the 50 months is absolutely dizzying. And in the interest of time, I shall only focus on two deals. Um, the the first deal was Heinemann, which he and I said to you earlier I would talk about Heinemann. So Hamlin and Octopus have been in business with Heinemann Group since 1976. They'd agreed to develop and market a series of bargain omnibus volumes of fiction writing, a 20th century library, mainly from the Heinemann Sector backlist. As I said, I'm sure people on this call have one of these Operation Pickle books, as they were called. Charles Pick, then the CEO of Heinemann Group, recognized that while he had the rights to the appropriate books in his Heinemann and Secker and Warburg backlist, he couldn't achieve a bargain retail price of £5 or £6 because he didn't have the distribution that would achieve economies of scale. Once Paul Hamlyn was involved, the original books in the Heinemann Octopus library were priced at £3.95, with a total global sale of over 1 million copies being achieved in its first year at retail prices amounting to 5.25 million, or over £31 million today, and further subsequent success. It's hardly surprising that Paul Hamlyn assumed that Octopus could sell and market Heinemann's books better than they could. And it's very interesting to see where Thomas Tilling had owned Heinemann since 1961. In June 1983, BTR, which was another industrial conglomerate with no stake in the book trade, acquired Tilling through a bitter hostile takeover. So Heinemann became part of a larger portfolio that was a poor fit alongside the engineering, transportation, and construction companies that BTR owned. To put it in context, it was a small business within a £3.1 billion company. Heinemann's 1984 revenues were £41 million, or 1.3% of BTR's total. It was characterized as a merger, but I mean, this is fascinating. So on this slide, it will show you Heinemann was founded in 1890, Octopus in 1972. But you can see how incredible the Octopus business was. That a business that was coming up for it would just gone past its 90th birthday was doing less revenue than Octopus was. It was termed a merger, but actually it was a takeover. The important aspect of the deal, though, is that BTR agreed that Hamlyn was entitled to direct the voting of BTR shares in Octopus unless his personal shareholding dipped below 51.1%, or BTR's shareholding fell below 25%. So this happened. This happened in February 1980, in 1985. This deal. I then want to take you forward to 1987. Just a couple of years later, more deals ensued. What was particularly interesting, once BTR owned a portion of Octopus, Octopus itself became a bit more conglomerate. Hamlyn became chairman. A man called Ian Irvin became group chief executive. But still, the business grew and grew and grew. And in Hamlin's chairman's statement accompanying the full year numbers for 1986, the tone was triumphal, outlining revenue up 15% to 159 million, operating margins improving 15% from 13%, and pre-tax profits up 28% and earnings up 39%. It concluded by saying that Octopus continued to be committed to growth both through internal generation and by acquisition. But no one could have thought that when receiving this report on the 21st of April 1987, that less than 3 months later, on the 2nd of July 1987, it was announced that terms had been agreed for Reed to acquire Octopus. The price was stellar, being 3.4 times Octopus's 1986 revenues and 20.6 times reported pre-tax profits. The internal press release quoted Paul Hamlyn as saying that what gives him particular satisfaction is not that we remain British-based, that a British publishing company joins the International Super League. It lays out the rationale for selling the business to Reed, stating that English language publishing had to operate on a global scale and that Octopus could not have realized its full creative potential as an independent company. Both Hamlyn and BTR voted for the deal, accounting for approaching 70% of the shareholder register. To put it in context, an investor buying shares at the time of Octopus's flotation in 1983 would have seen their investment grow 5.5 times by the time of the Reed deal. The timing of the deal is less surprising when taking into account the feverish atmosphere of 1987 with takeovers in the publishing sector, seeing Random House acquire Chatto, Virago, Bodley Head and Jonathan Cape, News Corp purchasing Harper and Row, and Walters Sampson's contested acquisition of Clure, as well as International Thompson successfully bidding for Associated Book Publishers. But like with all things Paul Hamlyn, the timing was impeccable given the stock market crash of the 17th of October 1987, which affected the London Stock Exchange, seeing a drop of 23% in 2 days, and all other significant global markets. Book historians should reconsider Hamlyn as a more central figure in the study of 20th century book history, both in the UK and globally as the progenitor of mass market illustrated publishing. My dissertation focused on his book publishing innovation and deal making, but Hamlyn had great success in music, art, prints, and TV, being the founder of Music for Pleasure, Art for Pleasure, and a co-founder of TV-AM. The publishing world he entered as a remainder dealer in 1949 looked very different when Reed bought Octopus in 1987. By his death, the publishing conglomerate era was established, and individual publishers had largely become mere cogs in colossal organizations. Hamlyn's career highlights the interplay between innovation and commercialization in the publishing industry. The description of Hamlyn by a contemporary publisher, Anthony Blonde, highlights this best in calling him the megalo publisher of immemorabilia. It reflects the age-old publishing tension that remains relevant today and often gets ignored in book history, the balance between providing cultural value and meeting commercial demands. Hamlyn believed the publisher's role was to give the end consumer what they would find memorable. He was a taste interpreter and a taste maker. I'll finish by saying that I believe his influence reaches far beyond the companies he established. His work inspired a generation of publishers and prompted the industry to reconsider its priorities. By demonstrating that profitability and accessibility could go hand in hand, he left a lasting mark on the cultural and economic landscape of British publishing. Hamlyn's legacy encourages us to reflect on the publishing industry's ongoing challenges. Today, many issues he faced, such as making books affordable, reaching new audiences, and balancing creative and commercial pressures, remain as relevant as ever. While Hamlyn's career is unique in book publishing, it should not be that book historians have found it so challenging to celebrate. In 2026, nearly 25 years after his death and 100 years since his birth, Hamlyn deserves broader recognition for his publishing innovation and commercial success. With his intense focus on the end consumer, driven by being an outsider as a brilliant innovator in book creation and merchandising, the industry needed people like Hamlyn, whatever Macmillan may have thought. And as a deal maker, he answered Seif emphatically. Octopus was indeed a real business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Would you like to just exit from the images? And
Yeah.
we have some time left for some conversation, I hope. Lovely. And I need to make myself visible as well. And Anna, I don't know whether I don't want to embarrass you, but if Anna Nyberg would like to join the conversation, you, of course, are most welcome. I still have it on my... Have you stopped screen sharing, Marcus? The event's being recorded, so I want to get this right.
Oh, have I? No.
It usually just disappears.
Yes.
Is that gone?
Yes.
There we go.
Hold on. What am I doing wrong here? Full
Oh,
screen.
no, it's come back. Here we are.
There we are.
You're now full screen. Hold on. Let's just get this get this right. Okay, that'll do, I think. Fine. And I did invite people to start typing in any questions or comments. I don't think anything's come in yet, but now is the moment. Can I perhaps just start the ball rolling, Marcus? Just one quite prosaic but possibly interesting question. What about the other two siblings? Did they achieve and do
Well,
interesting things?
the other three siblings. Well,
Well,
Michael
Michael
Hamburger,
Hamburger, obviously
obviously.
important, yeah.
His sister was a very eminent psychoanalyst.
Ah, okay.
I believe, what's her name? Actually, she wrote a poetry book as well, and her name is actually escaping me, although I've got it to my left somewhere. Um, oh, yes, she was called Ava Seligman.
Ah, interesting.
Clinical papers on analytical psychology. There we are. And the fourth sibling, I have not been able to find anything out about actually.
Interesting. Intriguing. And what sort of relationship did Michael Hamburger have with his brother Paul?
Oh,
Uh, Sorry.
I don't know if it's possibly indiscreet, but no, I'm just curious because obviously very, different kinds of activities.
Um, I think they. I mean, what I've tried to do with my research is I try to keep away from the anecdotal because obviously, given the sort of near history of Paul Hamlyn, there are quite a lot of people reasonably senior in publishing who all worked with him. Um, and obviously, people have differing views. So it's quite I haven't particularly wanted to be clouded by history, but I do live part of the time up in Suffolk, where Michael Hamburger lived and was part of the artistic community up here. I think they were very my this is my surmising. I think they were very different personalities. Michael Hamburger was very focused on translating from the German and really has his track record is extraordinary and very well researched, which is why I've really focused on Paul Hamlyn being so determined to look forward. Actually, that seemed to be everything that comes across in his manner and what he did and he the only sort of anecdotal I've taken on board about his family was that he was the least bookish of his family. He actually was a great fan of music, and I haven't mentioned the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, but obviously those of you on a lot of you on the call will know that for his 60th birthday, Helen Lady Hamlyn actually gave him uh, a number of nights at the Royal Opera House to give tickets to people disadvantaged who couldn't go to the opera. So actually, in a funny kind of way, music was much more his thing, as well as art. The art for pleasure. If you look in the sort of Financial Times archive, art for pleasure was just as much a business as any of his book publishing efforts were.
Mm. And I don't want to hog the conversation. I think you had some things you
I don't want to hog it
please
either. Perhaps
go
somebody
on.
else would.
And indeed, if
Perhaps somebody
anybody in the
else would like
audience,
to.
please do come forward, do present yourselves. Anna, go on.
No, it's just that, yeah, there's so much. It was fantastic
Mm,
talk, Marcus.
mm,
It was so well structured and
yeah.
everything. I really
Yeah,
feel I got a proper grip on him now.
yeah,
Yes, yes. I mean, that cover that you showed initially when it went from was it Alan and Unwin? Yes,
Yeah.
the art. Yes,
mm,
I thought, gosh, that says a lot. I mean, it just who was that book pitched at? And it occurred to me because I've always been very slightly anxious when you talk about he democratized art books. Well, other people make that claim, as you rightly said. Alan Lane, Penguin books were democratized. Also,
Yeah.
Thames Hudson would certainly make that claim that they democratized art books. But
Well, art without walls.
well, Art Without Walls, yes, but their World of Art series,
Mm.
was like Penguins. They were cheap, they were paperbacks, and so on. The design was very, very different. And all these ideas are occurring to me as I saw that. I mean, it seemed to me it's almost like a class thing that he
mm,
was perhaps Paul Hamlyn appealing to, for example, it sounds very snobbish, but maybe working class women who like, who wouldn't have thought that they would perhaps buy as many books. It wasn't part of their culture initially, but that book made instant popular appeal, didn't it? A popular appeal. Um, Thames and Hudson, of course, used for the design of their books a lot of émigré designers. They had German and Austrian, top of the range people who'd been the Bauhaus and what have you, and the design was, reflected. You sort of look at the books.
But I think I think the real difference, Anna, between him and the shall I say the proper publishers like Thames and Hudson is the merchandising, and that was very difficult to bring out
Yes.
in the talk today. But there's a wonderful article about that fine fair promotion in the Penrose Annual, um, that talks about how extraordinary this sort of putting books in customers' hands, people who didn't know they wanted these books, but suddenly post-war they had a bit more leisure time, and that they were, the book, the Marguerite Patten, who was essentially a home economist, and there's a sort of very interesting, potentially a very interesting dissertation or sort of research piece, sort of drawing the sort of thread from sort of Isabella Beeton through to sort of Marguerite Patten and then sort of Delia Smith and people. But yeah, Marguerite Patten was a home economist who appealed to post-war British
Yeah.
men
Yeah.
and women who had more time
Yes.
on their hands,
I mean,
probably
you
more
showed
women.
that wonderful slide of the market stall. I mean, maybe do you think it was really his? That there's a sort of set phrase about the emigres, or about any immigrants really. They have a different view. They have a fresh eyes and a fresh look. And he put two and two together and thought, bookshops are stuffy, old, dusty places. They want books. We could sell them. How can we do it differently? And he absolutely did. I mean, that was, that's and selling them at M&S and Woolworths and in fact, not the only, was he? Didn't Weidenfeld also sell books?
Well, Weidenfeld, of course, married into the Thief family
Yes,
briefly.
but also
Mm.
sold his books through them.
Yeah.
But this was a kind of completely different approach, wasn't it?
Well, mean, I'm sure that people on this call who know more about it than I do, but I mean, I definitely put a lot of it at that phrase Bildung. I think the sort of the knowledge that a family needed to have, and it was seen as a good thing. I talked a lot in my dissertation about highbrow, middlebrow, and lowbrow, and that was very much a sort of Anglo-American construct. And what was it that what's her name said? Virginia Woolf sort of talked about the perniciousness of the middlebrow, but actually that was exactly who he was reaching out to
Yeah.
and enabling was the middlebrow.
Yes. Yes. I would
Um,
have said not much Bildung in the kind of books that he or would I
well,
be wrong?
I'm not sure I agree actually, because I think
Mm.
that it was about, it was about bettering oneself. And that's what people wanted to do when they came back from war, is they wanted to put it behind them
Yes.
and better themselves.
Yes. But cookery, you said, was a very large part of the list initially, anyway.
Mm.
Yeah. And then
I wonder,
obviously that enabled him to go on and do art and music as well.
I wonder if I could chip in here, because one of the things that came out very forcibly from your wonderful talk was precisely a certain tension. I mean, I suppose, Insiders Outsiders is partly guilty of this too, but, we tend to think of the high culture that the emigres brought with them. And we're not talking about that here, are we? And there's a sort of sense of high culture, popular culture, commerce, business,
Yeah.
some
And
quite sort of interesting tensions, I think, at play
there
there.
are lots of tensions, and
Yeah.
actually, quite a lot of latent anti-Semitism as
I
well.
was wondering about that. Yeah.
Um,
The
I
flashy
mean,
outsider. I mean, my goodness. Yes, I mean,
Well, I mean, when Harold Macmillan said we can't have people like Paul Hamlyn in publishing, I sort of did scratch my head for a while and sort of wondered exactly what he meant by that. I think, but there's always that tension. I mean, I've published books throughout my career that definitely don't win prizes, but people like buying them. And there is always that tension between the sort of literary and the sort of impulse purchase, as we now call it. You know, I think it's always been, and going back to the sort of democratization point of that Anna said. I mean, actually, really from Caxton onwards, people have been trying to democratize books in the UK, because there have always been lots of different classes who've wanted books of different kinds, or what we now consider to be books. Um, but there's definitely a tension between commerce and culture. Um,
Yeah.
I would say personally that Hamlin's contribution to culture uh, up until now has been through the Paul Hamlyn Foundation. If you sort of look at the great French philosopher, sociologist Bourdieu, he would talk about the cultural capital that Hamlin imbued society with was actually through the Paul Hamlyn Foundation. I would argue differently. I would say that actually putting books in more people's hands at all stratas of society is just as important for a culture.
Absolutely. There is one comment, not a question, but from Peter Sinclair, saying, first of all, a fascinating contribution. My memory of 80s publishing was the desire of many to escape accountancy-led corporates, which presumably was a direct outcome of Paul Hamlyn's success. Of course, many small entrepreneurial publishers that started then, ironically, were bought up by the conglomerates later.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
Peter.
yeah.
One of the most wonderful couple of days that I spent researching my dissertation in the archives at Reading University was in the Leo Cooper archive, which Gilly Cooper's husband,
Yes, yes.
who found himself running a very small imprint within Heinemann, um, and when it was bought by Octopus, and I mean, just the most wonderful memos I found with sort of with writing from Leo on things going. Who has written this? Who has written? I'm just trying to find it actually. Who's written this memo? They must have been a baboon. Um, uh, and sort of fascinating things also, like sort of emailing his boss's boss, sort of going, I can't pay my freelancers. Like, the machines have sort of given up. And there's one thing that I've just found quickly. He finishes with a postscript. P.S. It's now 9th of December, and one of my authors, whose book was published on the November the 30th, only received his advance last night by minicab after Beryl had to use threatening language. So, the breakdown of that sort of thing. But that, of course, was the tension, is that Hamlin was the least corporate person going.
Mm, mm.
Would it be true to say that there was not much um, of a backlist, the legacy? What about the legacy of the books? I mean, I know at Thompson Hudson they place great store in the legacy of, and the importance of their backlist, that they keep on, they keep books in print, and decades later they are still sold and so on. They're supposed to have an afterlife. Would that be the opposite of
No, no,
no, no?
his backlist was very his backlist was, or the Octopus backlist lasted for a very long time. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, for a talk for another time, potentially, but I mean, actually, although Octopus was sold to Reed for a huge amount of money, uh, it was then the Octopus piece was actually uh, a management buyout 14 years later in 2001. uh, for only about 30 million pounds. I mean, actually, the sort of the conglomerate of Reed Internet of Reed Consumer, as it was known, was not didn't have a great legacy actually. Of that conglomerate didn't work terribly well of putting all these different businesses together, which is
Yeah.
not surprising because their business models were extremely different. If you look at Heinemann, if you look at the Heinemann numbers and compare them to the Octopus numbers and the underlying business models, they couldn't have been less similar businesses if they'd tried.
I'm looking at the time.
Yeah,
Numbers have fallen slightly because I
yeah,
suspect people have other commitments this evening.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
think we should probably draw things to a conclusion, unless that is anybody in the audience does have something they'd like to pitch in with. I can't believe that some of the eminent people I've seen the names of haven't got anything to say, but I won't
Sometimes people
obviously
think of things afterwards, don't they? They can always.
force the issue.
Yes.
Anyway, just to sort of round things up, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, so do spread the word. You might want to revisit. It was obviously a very richly packed sort of thought-provoking talk, Marcus, that you've just given us. You may find other things of interest on the Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel, so I would urge you to kind of dip into it, those of you who are not familiar with the project. If you're interested in our future events, do subscribe to our newsletter, which is easily done if you go to the insidersoutsiders.festival.org website and scroll right down to bottom right, a work of a few seconds really to sign up. Alan Mann saying thank you, Marcus, for a very interesting talk. And just if I could, in fact, slightly correct you, Marcus. In fact, Alan is giving a talk about her forthcoming publication on the history of Thames and Hudson, but it's actually not the next one. We have
No,
many other
sorry.
things. We have quite a few interesting things in between. So if I may, before we part company, everybody, just sort of run quickly through what is in store. The next one is actually designed at the end of January to more or less coincide with Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th. The talk itself is on the 29th, but it is relevant because the subject is Romek Marber, again, actually publishing, of course, very much part of what this is all about. The wonderful graphic designer, best known for his instantly recognizable, almost iconic designs for the Penguin Crime series, and we're going to have his niece and also the daughter of Abram Games, Naomi Games, in conversation about him. So that should be absolutely fascinating. What I haven't mentioned should have, obviously, he survived the worst, unlike the vast majority of people who we bring under the umbrella, Insiders Outsiders. Romek didn't escape in time, but he came out against all the odds, came out the other end and settled in this country after the war. We've also then got on the 9th of February, we've got a talk on architecture, something different this time, to mark the publication of a new book about somebody I must confess I had never heard of. She's called Ella Briggs, Viennese born, really interesting. I won't say any more. You can check on our website for further details and sign up if you so wish. On the 16th of February, a topic that Anna and I have been wanting to do a session on for many, quite a few years even now, by Juliet Sikrava on the Kasira family. I mean, what an extraordinary family that was. And then finally, for this sort of round, if you like, of talks on the 25th of February, Anna here is going to be talking about the history of Thames and Hudson. Lovely. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. Marcus, thank you again. That really was a most rewarding presentation. And I hope to see many of you again at future events. All the very best and good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.